Gang, hope you're doing well. So I want to talk about the first month of cross country. Some ideas, some workouts that you could do, whether you're a high school coach or a college coach. And there's a couple things to keep in mind, okay? Did your runners, or did you have enough or sufficient amount of summer base running leading up to it? Because obviously the running itself is the cake, and what you do during the cross country season is kind of the frosting, right? And everything else, if you want to put it that way. But did you do enough summer running? That's number one. Number two is, if you did, what you do in the first month can help set you up for the second month, which can help set you up for the third month, right? So this is the way I look at it. And by the way, if this is your first time to the channel, you're a coach or an athlete, please subscribe to this channel. I'm working on approaching 400 videos of training detail, training content of a super high level. And I'm speaking from 2 decades experience as a former competitive runner and a coach. So and with the stuff that I put out, I have used on my athletes with success. So I want to share them with you, and maybe you'll find something here that you think will be helpful. So if you do subscribe, let me know in the comments so I can thank you. It really means a lot. I'm trying to get to 2,500 subscribers. I'd like to get there before the end of the year, so we'll see if it happens. But I thank you regardless. But let's get to this now. Okay, first month of the season, if you've had a sufficient amount of summer running, okay. A combination of things, the way I look at it too. So I'll generally do, let's just say if you're in college, I'll start off with, you do your warm-up, your drills and strides. I'll start with 1.5 miles to 2 miles of tempo, right? And then you take a 4 to 5 minute active recovery, and then you do 1.5 miles of 2 miles of race pace. And then take the same 4 or 5 minute recovery active, and then you can either do some 300s on the back end, or some 400s, or some 500s at between 8K or 10K down to 5K pace, a progression. So you get a little bit of, you get the tempo, and then you get a little bit of race pace, and you get a little bit of race pace to faster than race pace. And then each time you do something like that, over the next, let's say, 4 weeks, you can modify, right? So let's just say you had 1.5 miles of tempo. The first week you do 1.75 miles the following week, and then 1.75 miles of race pace. And then take about that same amount of running, or about 1 mile to 1.5 miles worth of 5K pace running, let's say. The following time you do it, maybe you do 2 miles of tempo and 2 miles of race pace, and then you try to build up to 2 miles worth of 500s or 400s or 600s again. And you're getting up to volume now, which is 10K of volume or 6 miles worth of volume. And for college, you're either training for 8K or 10K. And even if you're training for 8K strictly, which is mostly Division 3, 10K or 6 miles is over distance. And at this point, if you're breaking up the pieces like that, it's not going to be too intense if your athletes are ready for it. Because then you transition into other things as it goes on. And then the following week, the fourth week, you could essentially, I do something like you do the tempo again, okay? And now what I do is I'll incorporate something right in the middle there of, instead of 1.5 miles or 2 miles of race pace, I'll do 1 mile at either goal race pace or faster. And then you go back to a 2 mile tempo again, and then in the back end you try to do that mile again at faster than the race pace. So now you broke it up into pieces, but those 2 hard efforts are faster than what you've been running before. And it's bits and pieces to help you transition into the more intense work that's going to happen in the middle of the season when races start to get a little bit more competitive and whatnot. So just a train of thought for that first month. If you haven't done a sufficient amount of summer base running, I generally like to do, obviously we build up the long run, we build up the volume itself, get up to the volume you want to get to, and then you can incorporate some hill runs, right? Short hill repeats, 200, 300 meter hill repeats. And then as a complementary workout later on in the week, you start building towards that threshold again. You can do tempo work, and then the following week do threshold work, like threshold thousands, but with the same distance. So let's just say you're only up to 3.5 miles. It's fine. You do 3.5 miles worth of tempo, you do 3.5 miles of threshold Ks. Then the following week, maybe you try to 4 mile tempo, and then the following week you try to do 4 miles worth of threshold Ks or threshold thousands, threshold 1200 or something like that. So that's the way to look at it if you haven't done enough summer work. Now, flip side, to high school, similar, okay? If you have enough summer base training, okay, I do something similar too. What I like to do, if you have enough summer base training, I like to test my athletes at 1 mile. A 1 mile time trial before the season starts, before we even start anything, so we can establish training paces. And what that does is it'll get you into the right training groups to make sure that everybody's training in the areas that they need to be. So nobody's overdoing it. Nobody's training a little bit too slow. Okay, everybody's training at their current fitness, which allows them to continue to progress towards the goal fitness. So, but with the sufficient base training, I do something similar. Let's just say it's 1 mile of tempo, 1 mile of race pace, and let's just say 4 times 400 at a little bit fast, like 3K pace. The following week, you do a mile and a half tempo, mile and a half race pace. Then you do either 6 times 400, or you maybe 3 times an 800, or 4 times a 600, something like that. Okay. The following week, again, you could do 2 miles of tempo, 2 miles at race pace if you can. If you can't, if it's a little bit too much, you do a mile and a half of race pace again, and then you tack on a little bit longer reps, but at the same distance towards the end, 3 miles worth or whatever it is, not to exceed 4 to 5 miles worth of volume. And again, at no point are you doing 5 miles worth of volume at race pace. That's a little bit too aggressive at the high school. You're not doing 5 times a mile at 5K pace or 8 times 1,000 at 5K pace. That's too much for high school. That's why it's broken up into pieces like this. Okay, the tempo allows you to transition into the harder stuff, which allows you to transition into the faster stuff. So. And then week 4, again, you can do let's just say a mile and a half or 2 mile tempo to get the heart rate up, and then it allows you to transition to the more intense part of the workout, and which allows you to benefit a little bit more significantly from it, which could be now, again, a mile and a half at race pace, and then on the back end you could do 3 times an 800 at race pace to faster than race pace or something like that. The back end of it gets a little bit longer, but the race distance stays about the same, or the volume of that component stays about a mile and a half. So there's a lot of ways you could break it down into pieces, but that's kind of the way I do it. And then on the other end, if you haven't had enough summer-based training as a high school runner, then I do it similar than I do to high school. Than the college. So I do the short. Obviously, you're building up to the volume you want to get to. And I do short hill repeats. Hill repeats is a great non-invasive way of gaining fitness and building leg strength, but it's a much more forgiving on the legs component, particularly if you don't have a significant amount of base training. So, but I would do it on a soft surface. And if you're just starting, I would start low volume, and you build that up over time. You can do hills the entire season if you want to focus on that, if somebody doesn't have a sufficient amount of base running. And then as a complementary workout, something similar, some threshold Ks or some tempo work. Building towards a 20 to 25 minute tempo continuously over a period of time, especially in high school, is a good thing to do. And then on the opposite week, you can incorporate some threshold stuff in there again. 5 times 1,000. All right, cruise thousands, and then the alternate week you do another tempo, and then after that you do, let's say, 4 times 1,200. Still 3 miles worth of volume, right? Then you go back to your tempo, something that regard. And if you can go to week 5 and week 6, you do a tempo, and then 3 times a mile, or even 4 times a mile at threshold pace, not exceeding 4 miles worth of work. Okay, so that's the way you can do that through the first 6 weeks, which will take you a little bit past the first 4 weeks. So, which is probably a better way to do it if you don't have a sufficient amount of base running. This kind of allows you to not have to overly race yourself into fitness, which can risk injury as well. But let me know if you find this helpful. I hope that you do. Give me some feedback in the comments if there's something similar or different that you do as a coach or an athlete. Feel free to share. I want as many people in the running community to know this stuff as possible. So have a great week, everybody. Talk to you next time.